He threw away the woman who saved him and invited her to watch him celebrate it. Tonight, billionaire Michael Sterling sits at the head of his family's legendary table, confident that money can bury every mistake he's ever made. He has a new woman on his arm, a dynasty at his back, and a mother he believes will fall in line. He is wrong about all three, because the woman he divorced, the doctor who gave him everything, is about to walk through that door. And when she does, nothing inside these walls will ever be the same. If this story already has you gripped, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And stay until the very end, because what Eleanor Sterling reveals tonight will leave you breathless. The dinner invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, which Sophia noticed because Tuesdays were her longest days. 2 back-to-back surgeries in the pediatric wing, a case review that ran 90 minutes past schedule, and then the quiet, hollow drive home through city streets she barely registered anymore. The envelope had been sitting on her kitchen counter when she got in, cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind of stationery that announced itself before you even opened it. Her name written in Eleanor Sterling's hand, not printed, handwritten, which meant the old woman had sat down at her desk with actual ink and deliberately chosen to do this the old way. Sophia had stood at the counter in her scrubs and read the card twice. You are invited to dinner at Sterling House, Saturday, 7 o'clock. Come alone. Come as yourself. E. That was all. No explanation. No apology on behalf of her son. No mention of why, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Eleanor Sterling was reaching back across the wreckage to pull Sophia toward a table she no longer had any right to sit at. She should have thrown the card away. She knew that. She stood there for a long moment with the envelope in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other and told herself clearly, throw it away, take a shower, sleep, go back to work. Let the Sterlings be the Sterlings. She had spent 3 years rebuilding a version of herself that didn't need any of them. She had patients who depended on her. She had a life that was small and quiet and entirely her own, and there was a particular kind of hard-won peace in that smallness that she was not willing to dismantle for anyone. She did not throw the card away. She wasn't sure why, except that Eleanor had never been cruel to her. Not once. Not during the marriage. Not during the dissolution of it. Not in the months that followed when the tabloid photographs of Michael and Victoria Vance appeared on every glossy surface in the city. Victoria at galas, Victoria at charity events, Victoria laughing in the passenger seat of Michael's car, with her hand resting on his jaw like a woman who had claimed a territory. Eleanor had sent Sophia a single text during those months. Don't read the papers. I'm sorry for what my son is. That was all. Sophia had read it 4 times and never replied, but she hadn't deleted it either. So on Saturday, she drove to Sterling House. She wore a simple charcoal dress, low heels, no jewelry except the small gold stud earrings she'd had since residency. She did not do her hair in any elaborate way. She did not wear perfume. She was not going to perform anything tonight. If Eleanor wanted her there, Eleanor could have her as she was, tired, guarded, and absolutely unwilling to pretend that the past year hadn't happened. The mansion sat at the end of a private road lined with old oak trees, their branches intertwined overhead so that in headlights they formed a kind of dark canopy, the kind of entrance that had been designed to remind visitors exactly who the Sterlings were. The house itself was 3 stories of creamstone, built in the early 20th century by Michael's great-grandfather, and it held the particular gravity of a place that had absorbed generations of ambition, grief, celebration, and rot. Sophia had walked through those front doors hundreds of times during her marriage. She had never entirely felt like she belonged there. She had also, in her more honest moments, recognized that the house was extraordinary in ways that had nothing to do with its value. She parked and sat in the car for a moment. There were 2 other vehicles in the circular drive. She recognized Michael's black sedan immediately. She'd sat in that car enough times to know the particular way it sat low on its chassis, heavier than it looked. The other was a white Mercedes, newer, the kind of car that announced a certain type of arrival. She didn't recognize it, but she didn't need to. She got out and walked to the front door. The housekeeper, a small woman named Carmen, who had worked for Eleanor for over 2 decades, opened the door before Sophia could knock. Carmen's expression did something complicated for a fraction of a second, a flash of recognition, of something almost relieved, and then she smoothed it back to professional neutrality. "Dr. Hayes," she stepped aside. "Mrs. Sterling is expecting you in the dining room." "Thank you, Carmen." Sophia stepped inside. The entrance hall smelled the same. That was the first thing she noticed, and it landed somewhere low in her chest like a weight she hadn't been carrying until this moment. Old wood and beeswax polish and something floral that Eleanor had always kept in a vase near the staircase. Some variety of white lily that Sophia had never learned the name of. The chandelier overhead threw the same amber light it always had, and the portrait of Thomas Sterling, Michael's great-grandfather, stern-faced, unreachable, hung in the same position on the wall above the second landing. She heard voices before she reached the dining room. Michael's voice first, lower than she remembered, or maybe just careful in a way it hadn't always been. And then a woman's voice, smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that had learned to fill rooms without raising itself. And then Eleanor's, which was neither of those things. Eleanor's voice was quiet and precise in the way of someone who had long ago stopped needing volume to make a point. Sophia stopped at the dining room threshold. The three of them were already seated. Eleanor at the head of the table, which was her right and had always been her position regardless of who sat opposite. Michael to Eleanor's left, in a dark jacket, his posture carrying the specific tension of a man who believed himself to be in control of a situation he wasn't entirely sure he controlled. And across from Michael, to Eleanor's right, the woman from the photographs. Victoria Vance was exactly what the pictures had suggested, and simultaneously something more complicated in person. She was striking in a way that had clearly required considerable attention and effort, not an attractive effort, but the kind of visible curation that announced itself. Her dress was a deep burgundy, perfectly fitted, the sort of thing that cost what Sophia earned in a week. Her hair was dark and glossy. She held herself with a particular confidence that Sophia recognized as rehearsed. Not fake exactly, but performed, the way a person performs confidence until it becomes second nature and then still doesn't quite lose the seam. Michael saw Sophia first. The color left his face. Not dramatically. Not in the way that might have given Sophia some satisfaction. It just drained like something being quietly emptied, and his jaw set in that specific way she had memorized during 3 years of marriage. The way it did when he was confronting something he hadn't adequately prepared for. Sophia. Eleanor rose from her chair. She was 71 years old and moved like a woman 20 years younger, upright and deliberate, and she crossed the room and took Sophia's hands in both of hers and held them with a grip that was firmer than expected. "I'm so glad you came." "Eleanor," Sophia let herself be held for a moment. "You didn't mention it would be a full table." "I didn't want to give you a reason to decline." Eleanor said it plainly, without apology, as though this was simply a reasonable logistical decision rather than a small act of manipulation. Then she looked at Sophia's face and added quietly, just for her, "You deserve to be at this table. I needed you here. Trust me a little longer." Sophia wasn't sure she had any trust left to distribute, but she nodded. Eleanor guided her to the remaining seat, between Eleanor and Michael, which Sophia recognized was not an accident. Nothing about Eleanor's seating arrangements was ever an accident, and Sophia sat down and placed her hands flat on the tablecloth and looked across the table at Victoria Vance. Victoria looked back. There was a moment, maybe 3 seconds, where neither of them spoke, and in that moment Sophia registered that Victoria was not what she had expected in the way that mattered. There was no cruelty in the woman's eyes. There was something more like assessment, and underneath that, barely perceptible, something that might have been uncertainty, which surprised her. "You must be Sophia," Victoria said. Her voice was exactly as it had sounded from the hallway. "Michael's mentioned you." "I imagine he has," Sophia said. "You're Victoria." "That's right." Across the table, Michael reached for his wine glass and set it back down without drinking from it. "I didn't know you were invited," he said to Sophia. Not accusatory, but not warm. Just flat. The way he got when he was processing something he hadn't decided how to handle yet. "I was invited," Sophia said. "Eleanor." "Yes," Eleanor said, settling back into her chair at the head of the table with the composure of someone who had planned precisely this and was entirely comfortable with the chaos it was producing. I invited her. This is my house and my table, and I will have at it whom I choose. She picked up her own glass. Now, shall we have dinner? For a moment, nobody moved. Then Carmen appeared with the first course and the formality of it, the presence of food, of silver, of routine, provided enough structure that they could all agree without agreeing to proceed. The soup was a pale consommé, clear and delicate, and Sophia focused on it while the table rearranged itself around the fact of her presence. She could feel Michael's discomfort in her peripheral vision, the way he sat with a kind of controlled stillness that, in another context, might have looked like composure, but that she knew, from years of proximity, was actually the opposite. She could feel Victoria recalibrating, the way you could feel a person recalculate when a variable they hadn't accounted for walks into the equation. Eleanor was unreadable. That had always been true. "Tell me about your work," Eleanor said to Sophia, and her voice had a warmth in it that cut through the formality without disrupting it. "I know you've taken on more surgical hours." "Pediatric cardiology," Sophia said. "We had a run of complex cases this fall. 2 congenital defects that required multi-stage repair. One of them, a girl, 4 years old, she spent 11 weeks in the ICU before we were confident in her." She paused. "She went home last month." Eleanor's expression shifted into something that wasn't sympathy exactly, but was close to it. "And her family?" "Held together by very thin rope for a long time," Sophia said. "They're still here. That's the most you can say sometimes." Michael set his spoon down. He wasn't looking at Sophia. He was looking at the tablecloth, at some fixed point that was either the center of the table or the floor of his own skull. She couldn't tell which. But he was listening. She could tell by the particular stillness of him. Victoria said, "That must be emotionally taxing, working with children." She said it carefully, as though this were polite conversation rather than what it actually was, which was a woman finding her footing in a room that had unexpectedly shifted. "It is," Sophia said, "but taxing and meaningful aren't mutually exclusive." A pause. Eleanor allowed the pause. "Victoria," Eleanor said, turning to her, "what do you do?" Victoria straightened slightly. She had been prepared for this question. "I run a consulting firm, primarily brand development for luxury markets. We work with high-end hospitality, private aviation, a handful of boutique investment funds." "Profitable," Eleanor said. "Very." "And rewarding?" Eleanor asked. Victoria considered this for a fraction of a second too long. "It can be." Eleanor said, and returned to her consommé. The word held nothing on its surface. Underneath it was everything. Sophia watched Michael absorb the exchange. He knew his mother. He understood that the question about reward was not idle, that Eleanor had drawn a line between the two women in that exchange as clearly as if she had used chalk, and he was sitting with the particular misery of someone who had walked into something he couldn't redirect. He had brought Victoria here to be approved. Eleanor was not approving. The main course arrived. Roast lamb with a reduction that was one of Carmen's older recipes, something the kitchen had been making for at least 2 decades. It was the kind of food that belonged to the house, that had been served at birthdays and holidays, and at the dinner celebrating Michael's father's appointment to the board of the company he had spent his life building. Sophia had eaten this meal before. Victoria had not. "This is extraordinary," Victoria said, "of the lamb." She meant it, which Sophia noted without particular satisfaction. "Carmen's recipe," Eleanor said. "Her mother taught her." "Do you entertain often?" Victoria asked. "Less than I used to," Eleanor said. "I've become selective." The way she said it was entirely pleasant. The meaning of it was not. Michael cleared his throat. "Mother, how was your trip to Carmel?" Eleanor regarded him the way she might regard an unexpected interruption. "Fine, Michael. The coast was cold. The house needed some work on the lower deck. I had it seen to." "Good." A pause. "The view's worth it." "Most worthwhile things require maintenance," Eleanor said. She looked at him steadily. "You used to understand that." The table went very quiet. Victoria lifted her wine glass. Sophia cut a piece of lamb and ate it and did not look at Michael because looking at him right now would be a mistake, would cost her the composure she had spent the entire drive here constructing, and she was not willing to lose that composure in this room in front of these people. The dinner continued. Course by course, the evening built a kind of architecture that Sophia began to understand was deliberate. Eleanor steered conversation with the precision of someone who had planned every exit and entrance of this particular story. She asked Victoria about her family, parents, where she grew up, whether she had siblings, and Victoria answered in the practiced way of someone who had been on many impressive dates and learned how to make a biography sound like a highlight reel. She asked Michael about work, and Michael gave the kind of answer that had always slightly irritated Sophia, the answer that reduced everything to metrics and market position, as though the company were the point of him rather than the vehicle. And she asked Sophia, at various intervals, about things that had nothing to do with work, about the book she'd mentioned once, over a year ago, that she was trying to read, about the small apartment garden Sophia had started on her balcony after the divorce, which Eleanor knew about only because Sophia had texted her a photograph of the first tomatoes as a moment of genuine, uncomplicated joy, about the running she'd taken up again. Each time Eleanor turned to Sophia, the texture of her attention shifted. It became something warmer and more specific. It was not performance. Sophia had known Eleanor long enough to distinguish. Michael noticed. He kept noticing. Victoria noticed too and managed it with dignity, but Sophia watched the small adjustments. The way Victoria's posture became incrementally more careful, the way her laugh calibrated itself when Eleanor didn't respond to it the way she expected. She was not a stupid woman. She was reading the room accurately. What she couldn't do anything about was what she was reading. When dessert was cleared, Eleanor stood. "Come into the study," she said. Not a question. Michael looked at her. "Mother, it's late." "It's 9 o'clock, Michael." She was already moving toward the hallway. "Come." They followed her. The study was the room in Sterling House that Sophia had always felt most deeply belonged to the house itself, rather than to any one person. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace that actually worked, the kind of reading chairs that had been broken in over decades rather than designed to look that way. Eleanor's desk was mahogany and vast, and covered in the organized clutter of a woman who worked from home even into her 7th decade. There were photographs on the walls. Thomas Sterling's formal portrait, a photograph of the family at a beach Sophia had never been able to identify, and near the window, one she had not noticed on previous visits, a small framed image of Sophia and Eleanor, taken at Michael's birthday 4 years ago. Not of Michael, of the two of them. Victoria saw it too. Eleanor moved to her desk and opened the top drawer. "There's something I want to show all of you," she said, "and I want to do it while I'm still sharp and while the moment is what it needs to be." She removed a document from the drawer. It was folded, sealed with the notary's stamp, and she carried it across the room with the deliberateness of someone lifting something heavier than paper. She set it on the low table in front of them. "This is the deed to Sterling House," Eleanor said, "the original deed and the transfer document." Michael went still. Not the dinner table stillness, not the controlled composure stillness. This was something else. Something that fell through the floor of composure into something raw underneath. "What transfer?" he said. "I am transferring ownership of this property," Eleanor said, looking at him steadily, "to Sophia." Victoria said nothing. She had gone very quiet, very quickly. Michael's jaw worked. "This house has always been mine," Eleanor said. "Your father gave it to me when we married. It was never transferred into the family trust. It was never titled under the company. It has been, every day of your life, my property. And I am choosing, with full legal standing and complete clarity of mind, to give it to Sophia Hayes." The fire shifted in the grate. Sophia was looking at the document and not at Michael, but she could hear him breathing. It had changed, become shallower. "Mother," he said, and his voice had stripped down to something she had never heard from him in 3 years of marriage. Not the CEO, not the man who controlled rooms, not even the man she had fallen in love with. Just a person confronting the ground, vanishing beneath him. "Why?" Eleanor looked at her son for a long moment. "Because she earned it," Eleanor said quietly. "Not the building, not the square footage. She earned what it represents. 3 years in this family, Michael, and she gave it more than you ever did. She paused. You gave the company everything. You gave Victoria your attention. You gave yourself permission to leave a woman who was carrying something irreplaceable about this family inside her because you were bored and she was too focused on other people's children to focus on your ego. Michael's face changed. She hadn't seen that particular change before. It moved through something like anger and something like shame and landed somewhere that didn't have a clean name. That's not what happened, he said. Tell me what happened, Eleanor said. He didn't. Victoria was standing near the bookshelf, very still, and Sophia glanced at her. Victoria's expression had settled into something complicated and stripped of its earlier composure. She looked like a woman who had expected one kind of evening and was sitting inside a completely different one. There was something almost like recognition in her face, not cruelty, just the recognition of someone who was finally seeing the shape of a room she had misread. Sophia picked up the document. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by that. The deed was real. The notary seal was real. The transfer document bore Eleanor's signature and a date 3 months ago, meaning Eleanor had decided this before tonight, had sat with this decision and held it and chosen the moment carefully. Eleanor, Sophia said, this is... She stopped, started again. I don't know what to do with this. Yes, you do, Eleanor said. And the way she said it was not pressure. It was confidence. The particular confidence of a woman who had spent 70 years reading people and had read Sophia with absolute accuracy. I haven't agreed to anything, Sophia said. No, Eleanor said. I'm not asking you to agree tonight. I'm asking you to take the document and think about what it means. She looked at Sophia with something that was very close to love, not the blood love of family, but the chosen love of two people who had recognized something in each other across a table 3 years ago and never quite let go of it. The house is yours. What you do with it is yours. But I needed you to have it because it belongs with someone who understands what a home actually is. Michael made a sound, not quite words. And you, Eleanor said, turning to him, and her voice did not harden, but it did not soften either, need to understand what you threw away, not the property, the person. He looked at his mother, then he looked at Sophia. Sophia looked back at him, and for the first time since she'd walked through the front door that evening, she let herself look at him the way she actually wanted to, not with the careful neutrality she'd maintained through dinner, but with the full weight of everything she'd carried since the day he'd handed her the divorce papers in the kitchen of the apartment they'd shared, apologetic in the most insufficient possible way, already half out the door toward the next version of his life. He looked older. That was the honest thing. Not in a bad way, just in the way of a man who had started to live inside the consequences of his choices and found the space unexpectedly uncomfortable. Michael, she said, and kept her voice even, I'm going to take this home with me tonight. I'm going to think about it. A pause. That's all I'm promising. He nodded, barely, like a man who understood he wasn't in a position to ask for more. Victoria said from the bookshelf, I think I should go. Eleanor looked at her. Stay for coffee if you'd like. You're not unwelcome. Victoria shook her head. Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Sterling. It was educational. The word was not sarcasm. It sounded like she actually meant it. She looked once at Michael, and whatever passed between them in that look was quick and private and finished. Then she nodded at Sophia, not warmly, but not without a kind of acknowledgement, and left the study. They heard her heels on the hallway floor, and then the front door, and then nothing. Michael hadn't moved. I'll have Carmen bring coffee, Eleanor said, and moved toward the study door with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood when to leave two people alone. The door closed behind her. Sophia stood holding the deed in both hands in the room that was now somehow hers, and across from her Michael Sterling stood in the house he had always believed was his birthright, and neither of them said anything for a long time. The fire burned. The photographs watched. And somewhere in the back of Sophia's mind, underneath the exhaustion and the residual grief and the complicated unwanted tenderness she still felt when she looked at him, underneath all of it, something had shifted. Not resolved, not softened into forgiveness, but shifted, the way the ground shifts before something either collapses or finds its new level. She didn't know yet which one this was. Neither did he. "I didn't know she was going to do this," Michael said at last, his voice low and stripped of performance. He was looking at the deed in her hands rather than at her face. I'm not saying that to explain it away. I'm just telling you the truth." "I know you didn't," Sophia said. "Does that change anything?" She thought about the 4-year-old girl in the ICU, the 11 weeks, the family held together by thin rope, the way the child's heart had been failing and the way they had reached inside and repaired it piece by piece, not because it was simple, but because it was necessary. "I don't know yet," she said. She folded the deed carefully and held it against her chest and waited for the coffee to come. And Michael stood across from her in his mother's study, in the house that no longer belonged to him, and for the first time in as long as Sophia could remember, he did not look like a man who believed he controlled anything at all, which was, she thought, probably the beginning of something. She just didn't know what. The coffee came and went. Carmen had brought it on a silver tray with 2 cups, set it on the low table beside the deed, and retreated without a word, which was exactly the kind of discretion that Carmen had perfected over 23 years in this house. Sophia poured her own. Michael didn't touch his. They stayed in the study for another 20 minutes, not talking, not exactly comfortable with the silence, but not willing to break it with the wrong words either. Eleanor did not return. Sophia understood that was intentional too. Eleanor had lit the fire and stepped back and left them in the smoke, which was either wisdom or cruelty, or both, which was often how Eleanor operated. At 9:40, Sophia picked up her bag and the deed and said goodnight. Michael walked her to the front door. He didn't offer to walk her to her car, and she didn't want him to. They stood in the entrance hall under the amber chandelier and the portrait of Thomas Sterling, and Michael put his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at her with something that was not quite an apology, but was in the neighborhood of one. "Drive safe," he said. "I always do," she said. She drove home in the dark with the deed on the passenger seat and the radio off and the city moving past her windows like something she was watching from the wrong side of glass. She did not sleep well. 3 days passed. Sophia went back to work. She had 2 scheduled surgeries and a consult with a family from out of state whose son had been referred by a hospital in Phoenix. 6 years old, an arterial defect that 2 other surgical teams had declined to touch. She spent 4 hours reviewing his imaging on Tuesday evening with her colleague, Dr. Renata Choi, the 2 of them at the light board with cold coffee and the particular grim focus of people who understood the weight of what they were considering. "It's operable," Renata said. "Barely." "I know." "The margin for error is—" "I know," Sophia said again. "I've been staring at it for 2 hours. Renata looked at her sideways. "You okay? You've been somewhere else all week." "I'm here." "Physically." Sophia pulled off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "I had dinner at Sterling House on Saturday." Renata was quiet for a moment. Then, "Eleanor invited you?" "Eleanor invited me." "Was he there?" "Yes." "And?" Sophia picked up the imaging scan and looked at the boy's small, complicated heart and thought about what it meant to hold something broken and decide whether you were capable of repairing it. "And Eleanor gave me the house." The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone receiving information they hadn't prepared for. Renata set her coffee cup down very carefully. "She gave you Sterling House?" "The deed, transfer document, notarized 3 months ago." "Sophia." "I know." "What are you going to do?" Sophia put the scan back on the light board. "Figure out this surgery first." She was not, she knew, as separate from Saturday night as she was performing. The deed was in the drawer of her nightstand. She had not moved it, had not called a lawyer, had not called Eleanor to discuss it, had not called Michael. She had put it in the drawer and gone to work and let the weight of it sit there in the dark next to her while she slept, or tried to sleep, which was not the same thing. What she kept coming back to, in the margins of her days, was not the house. It was the look on Michael's face when Eleanor had said you gave yourself permission to leave a woman who was carrying something irreplaceable about this family inside her. She kept coming back to what he hadn't said when Eleanor had asked him to tell her what happened. The way his mouth had opened and then closed again, like a man who had the words and couldn't arrange them into something defensible. She had known, during the marriage, that something was wrong long before he told her. She had known the way you know things you're not ready to act on. In the body first, in the quality of the silences, in the way he had started to look at her like she was a problem he was trying to solve, rather than a person he was trying to love. She had been so busy. That was the honest thing. The pediatric ward took everything she had, and she had given it willingly, and there had been nights she came home past midnight and he was already asleep, and she had stood in the doorway of their bedroom and felt the distance between them as a physical dimension, a space with measurable width, and told herself they would address it when the caseload eased. The caseload never eased. She was not without responsibility in what had happened. That was a thing she had come to, slowly and with great reluctance, in the months after the divorce. She had loved him. She had also, in ways she was still mapping, loved her work in a manner that made him feel secondary, and she had not handled that well, had not named it or tried to find a different configuration. She had simply kept moving forward and assumed he would stay. He hadn't. None of which excused what he did, but it complicated the clean story of wrongdoer and wronged, which was the story she had needed for a while to survive. On Thursday afternoon, her phone rang. Michael. She looked at it for 3 full rings and then answered. I need to talk to you, he said. His voice was flat in a way that sounded like effort rather than indifference. Not about the house. About something else. What? Victoria. Sophia leaned back in her office chair. Through her window, she could see the hospital courtyard, a small square of November sky, the color of old pewter. What about her? She's not going to make a scene, he said. She's not that kind of person, but she ended it, last night. She was very calm about it. She said she needed me to understand something. Sophia waited. She said she'd spent the last 6 months in love with what I represented, Michael said. Not with me. She said she'd been honest enough with herself by Tuesday morning to understand that the difference mattered. She sounds like a more self-aware person than you gave her credit for. Yeah. A pause. She was right. Sophia didn't say anything. I'm not calling because of that, Michael said. I'm not calling to ask you anything. He stopped. She could hear him breathing. I wanted you to know that I'm not going to fight the transfer. I'm not going to call lawyers or challenge it. Whatever you decide to do with the house, I'm not in the way. I didn't ask you not to be in the way. I know. Another pause. Consider it offered anyway. Sophia looked at the pewter sky. A maintenance worker was crossing the courtyard below, moving quickly against the cold, collar turned up, head down. Michael, why did you actually call? A long silence. Because I haven't slept since Saturday, he said. And I thought maybe hearing your voice would make it worse or better, and either one would be more useful than just... He stopped again. Never mind. It was a bad idea. Don't hang up, she said. She wasn't sure why she said it. It came out before she decided to say it, which told her something she wasn't ready to fully examine. Just don't. He didn't. They stayed on the phone for a moment without speaking, which should have been awkward and was instead something else she couldn't name exactly, something that had the texture of 2 people standing in a demolished building and acknowledging the structure that used to be there. I'm busy this week, she said finally, but maybe we could talk properly when I'm not between surgeries. Okay? He said, very quiet. Okay. Net. Eleanor called on Friday morning. Sophia was in the elevator between floors when her phone buzzed, and she stepped out on the 3rd-floor landing and answered in the corridor outside the neurology department, where it was always slightly too warm and always slightly too loud. Have you looked at it again? Eleanor asked, without preamble. This was how Eleanor always began calls. No greeting, no small talk. She believed the first words of a conversation should do actual work. The deed? Yes. And? And I'm not making any decisions from the middle of a work week, Sophia said. Eleanor, what you did was, I don't know what to call it. Extraordinary doesn't quite cover it, and neither does inappropriate, which it also might be. Appropriate is a word for people who are afraid of doing the necessary thing, Eleanor said. I am not afraid. I know you're not. Do you understand why I did it? Sophia leaned against the corridor wall. A nurse passed her with the chart and didn't look up. I think I understand that you trust me. More than that, Eleanor said. That house has been a monument to the wrong things for a very long time. My husband was a great man in many ways, and a difficult one in others, and after he died, I looked at that house and understood that it had been built to impress rather than to shelter. There's a difference. A pause. You know the difference. I saw it in you the first night Michael brought you to dinner. You looked at the house the way someone looks at a beautiful thing that could be made useful. Sophia thought about that. He called me, she said. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I know. He told you? He told me he was going to. He asked if I thought it was a mistake. A pause. I told him that depending on his reasons, it might be the first intelligent thing he'd done in 8 months. Despite herself, Sophia almost smiled. You are a brutal woman. I am a precise woman, Eleanor said. There's a difference there, too. Another pause, and then Eleanor's voice shifted, lost its edge, became something closer to the way she'd spoken in the study, the warmth beneath the precision. Sophia, I'm not trying to engineer something. I want you to understand that. I'm not trying to push you toward my son or away from him. What I've given you has nothing to do with him. The house is yours because you deserve something that has weight. Something that says, you were here, you mattered, your years were not wasted even though they ended badly. Sophia's throat tightened. She pressed her back harder against the wall and stared at the fluorescent lights overhead and breathed through it. Thank you, she said when she trusted her voice. I'll call you next week. I'll be here, Eleanor said, and hung up. The call she was not prepared for came on Saturday morning. She was in her apartment with coffee and the deed spread open on her kitchen table when her phone rang and the number was one she didn't recognize. But the area code was local, and she answered out of the reflexive habit of a doctor who had learned that unknown numbers were sometimes families in waiting rooms. Dr. Hayes? A woman's voice. Composed, but with something underneath it that had been recently controlled. This is Victoria Vance. Sophia set her coffee cup down carefully. Victoria, she said. I got your number from Eleanor, Victoria said. She gave it to me when I asked. I imagine she told you. She didn't mention it, Sophia said, but I'm not surprised. A breath on the other end of the line. I want to apologize. Sophia said nothing, which was not refusal, just space. I knew Michael had been married, Victoria said. I knew the marriage ended, and I knew the timeline was quick. I told myself it wasn't my business, that what happened between the two of you was before me. Another breath. But sitting across that table from you, watching Eleanor talk to you the way she did, I understood something I'd been working very hard not to understand, which is that I was never in a real relationship with that man. I was in a relationship with the architecture around him, the house, the name, the way rooms responded when he walked into them. A pause. I thought that was love. I was wrong. Sophia looked at the deed on the table, at the clean official type of it, the notary seal, Eleanor's signature, her own name printed in the space-marked transferee, as though it had always been waiting there. I don't think you owe me an apology, Sophia said finally. You weren't responsible for what he chose. No, Victoria said, but I want you to know I wasn't malicious. I genuinely thought... She stopped, restarted. I thought I could love him into being better, which is its own kind of arrogance, I suppose. It is, Sophia said, and kept her voice level. So is ignoring all the signs that he wasn't ready. A silence. You're not forgiving me, Victoria said. I'm not angry at you, Sophia said. That's different. Another silence, and in it Sophia heard something shift in Victoria. Not relief exactly, but the release of something held tightly. I'm going to go back to Denver, Victoria said. My firm has an office there. I've been in this city for 2 years, and I think I've been in love with the city's idea of itself more than I've been in love with any real thing in it.
A pause. Anyway, I just needed to say it. I know, Sophia said. You're a good doctor, Victoria said, which was unexpected enough that Sophia blinked. I looked you up afterward, your published work, the congenital cardiac repair protocols you co-authored last year. A pause. I wanted to understand what I was looking at across that table. And? Someone who actually gives a damn, Victoria said quietly. It's rarer than you'd think. She hung up. Sophia sat with her coffee going cold and the deed in front of her and outside her window. The city went about its Saturday with indifference, and she thought about architecture. The word Victoria had used, the architecture around Michael, the idea that you could confuse the frame for the thing the frame contained. She thought about what it had felt like to love him at the beginning, before the frame had become the whole point.
It had felt, she remembered now, like loving someone who was still in the process of becoming himself, like being present at something unfinished. She folded the deed back into its envelope. She picked up her phone and called her lawyer. The meeting with the lawyer was Tuesday afternoon. A woman named Dana Croft, who had handled Sophia's side of the divorce with surgical efficiency and approximately zero sentimentality. Dana received the deed, read it, examined the transfer document, and looked up at Sophia over the rim of her glasses with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally astonished. This is valid, Dana said. I assumed it was. No, I mean, it's completely airtight. She had this drawn up by Harris Bowman's office. They're the best estate firm in the city. There's no challenge mechanism. The title transfers the moment you file, and Eleanor Sterling has fully clear authority to make this transfer. The property has never been in the family trust. It was her personal asset from the date of purchase. Dana set the document down. Sophia, this property is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 million. I know. What do you want to do with it? Sophia had been thinking about this since Saturday morning and in some formless way since the night in the study. She had turned it over and over in her waking hours and in the threshold space before sleep, and she had arrived, with more certainty than she'd expected, at a shape. I want to convert it, she said. Not sell it, not live in it. Convert it into a residential facility for families of long-term pediatric patients, people who are traveling from out of state or who can't afford extended hotels, or who are spending months inside a hospital system because their kid isn't going home anytime soon. She paused. A place that's actually a home, that feels like one. Dana looked at her for a long moment. That's a significant undertaking, Dana said. Nonprofit structure, zoning changes, operational funding. I know. It could take years. I know that too. Do you have a name in mind? Sophia thought of Eleanor's voice on the phone. Your years were not wasted, even though they ended badly. She thought of the child with the damaged heart who had spent 11 weeks in the ICU while her family waited in bad chairs in a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Not yet, she said, but I'll know it when I find it. Dana nodded, pulled her legal pad toward her, and uncapped her pen. Okay, let's talk about what this actually takes. They were an hour into the conversation when Sophia's phone buzzed on the table between them. She glanced at the screen out of habit and then went still. It was a text from a number she hadn't saved but recognized from last week. Michael. 3 words. We need to talk. And then, immediately after, a second message. Not the house. Something else. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Sophia looked at the 2 messages on the screen. Dana was still talking, reviewing something about zoning designations, and Sophia made herself focus, made herself stay in the room, but her mind had moved sideways into the space those 2 messages occupied, into the texture of something I should have told you a long time ago, into what that could mean and whether she was prepared for whatever it was. She typed back 1 word, when, and turned her phone face down and returned to the legal pad and the future she was trying to build in the shell of something that had broken. But her hands, when she picked up her own pen, were not entirely steady. He texted back within the hour. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. The house on Mercer. I'll be there. The house on Mercer was what they had always called it during the marriage. A smaller property Michael owned outright. A 1940s Craftsman he'd bought before the company went public, before the money became the kind of money that changed the scale of everything. He had kept it during and after the divorce without explanation, and Sophia had not asked for it in the settlement because it had always felt more like his interior life than his actual life, a place he retreated to when Sterling House felt too much like Sterling House, which happened more often than people would have guessed. She had not been there in over a year. She drove there after work Wednesday, still in her coat, still carrying the specific depletion of a day that had included a 6-hour surgery and a conversation with a family that no training fully prepared you for. The parents of the boy from Phoenix, sitting across a table from her in a conference room, trying to hold their faces together while she explained what the surgery would involve and what the margins looked like and what it would mean if they were outside those margins. She had driven away from the hospital with her hands at precisely 10 and 2 and her jaw clenched so hard it ached, and she had not let herself feel any of it, which was a skill she had developed over a long career and which she sometimes worried she had developed too well. The Craftsman was lit from inside when she arrived. One lamp in the front window, the porch light on. Michael's car in the driveway. She sat in her own car for 30 seconds and then got out. He opened the door before she knocked, which meant he'd been watching for her, which she filed away without deciding what to do with it. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He probably hadn't. He was wearing a dark sweater and no jacket, and his hair was slightly wrong, not the controlled presentation she associated with him, but something more honest, more approximate. He stepped aside to let her in. The house smelled like coffee and old wood, and something she couldn't identify, something faintly chemical underneath it all. She noticed it and set it aside. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Your message was specific enough that I didn't think I should wait," she said. She moved into the living room. The house was exactly as she remembered it. The built-in bookshelves, the low leather couch, the bay window looking out at the narrow backyard where a Japanese maple stood bare now in the November dark. He had not changed anything. She wasn't sure if that meant something or nothing. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat. He remained standing, which was either restlessness or avoidance, and she watched him move to the window and look out at the maple tree as though it contained information he needed. "There's something I have to tell you," he said, "and I need you to understand that I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. That's not what this is." "Okay," she said, "and I'm not telling you because I think it changes anything between us," he said, "or because I'm trying to explain away what I did. What I did was wrong regardless of context, and I am not going to use this as an excuse." "Michael," she kept her voice level, "tell me." He turned from the window. "When I filed for the divorce," he said, "I had just come from a diagnostic appointment." He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "I had been having symptoms for about 3 months. Fatigue, some cognitive fog, tremors in my right hand that came and went. I told myself it was stress. The company was in the middle of the Harwick acquisition. We were working 18-hour days. I wasn't sleeping. I told myself it was stress." Sophia had gone very still. "My doctor referred me to a neurologist," Michael said. "Dr. Paul Osei at Meridian Medical. He ran a full workup." He looked at her directly for the first time since she'd sat down. The preliminary diagnosis was early-onset Parkinson's. He wasn't certain. He said he needed another 6 weeks of observation and additional imaging. A pause that had weight to it. "I got the confirmation 11 days after I handed you the divorce papers." The room was very quiet. Sophia looked at him. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't. She was aware of the distance between the couch and where he was standing, which felt suddenly like something measurable and important. "You filed for divorce," she said slowly, "while you were waiting for a neurological diagnosis." "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." "No." "Michael." She stopped, started again. "Why?" He moved away from the window and sat down in the armchair across from her, not close, not distant, and he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at his hands. His right hand, she noticed now, was resting differently than his left. Something in the way it settled. She had not noticed this before, or had noticed it and processed it wrong. "Because I had spent years watching you carry everyone else's weight," he said. "Families in waiting rooms. Children who needed everything you had, every broken thing in your path. You moved toward it. He raised his eyes. I was terrified that if you knew, you would stay. Not because you loved me, because you were a doctor and I was sick, and walking away from a sick person was not something Sophia Hayes was capable of. You don't get to make that choice for me, she said. Her voice was quiet and completely cold. I know. You took that from me, the right to choose. Her hands were flat on her knees, and she pressed them down hard against the fabric of her trousers and breathed through her nose. You decided what I would do, and then you acted as though your decision was mine. You let me believe I was left for someone younger and shinier and more convenient, and I spent 8 months rebuilding myself around a story that wasn't even true. It was partly true, he said. She looked at him. Victoria was real, he said. What I felt, I don't know what to call it. Relief, maybe. She didn't know me well enough to want anything from me except what I could perform, and performing was easier than... He stopped. I am not a good man, Sophia. I want you to hear that from me directly. I made cowardly choices, and I told myself they were protective, and they weren't. They were just cowardly. When did you plan to tell me? I didn't, he said. I planned to not tell you, ever. I planned to manage it quietly, and let the distance grow, and eventually you would rebuild your life, and I would manage mine, and you would never have to know. He looked at her with something that had moved all the way past shame into a kind of naked exhaustion. Then my mother gave you the house, and I sat in that study on Saturday night and looked at your face, and I understood that I had been lying to you in about 15 different ways simultaneously, and that I could not be in the same room with you and carry it anymore. Sophia stood up. She walked to the bay window and stood where he had been standing and looked at the Japanese maple in the dark and breathed. She was a cardiologist. She knew what Parkinson's looked like in its early stages, knew the disease's progression, knew the range of outcomes, knew what current treatment protocols could and couldn't do. She was processing all of that clinical knowledge on one level while on another level entirely. She was standing inside the wreckage of the narrative she had constructed to survive the past 8 months, and understanding that the ground it had been built on was not what she'd thought. He had been frightened. That was the thing she kept returning to. Underneath all of it, the divorce, Victoria, the performance of moving on, he had been a frightened man who had received a diagnosis alone and made a catastrophic decision about how to protect the person he believed he was incapable of asking for help from. She was furious about it. She was going to be furious about it for a long time. She was also, standing at that window in the dark, aware of something else, something she did not want to be aware of. Who knows? She asked. Her voice came out controlled, which surprised her. My doctor. My mother. She turned. Eleanor knows. I told her 2 weeks after the confirmation. I couldn't... He stopped. She's the only person I told. She's been the only person who knew. Sophia thought about Eleanor at the dinner table, watching Michael with those quiet, precise eyes, the way she had orchestrated the evening, the photograph on the wall, the deed. I needed you to have it. Not because she was trying to push them together, because she was trying to make sure that whatever happened next, Sophia had something solid underneath her. A woman who knew the full picture had been making sure Sophia had weight and ground and permanence in a situation where the ground was going to move. She set up the dinner because of this, Sophia said. Not a question. She said she needed to see the two of you in the same room. He looked at his hands again. She said she needed to know what was still there before she decided what to do with the house. A pause. I didn't know what she was planning. I didn't know she was going to give it to you that night. Sophia came back from the window and stood in the center of the room and looked at him. He looked back at her. He was not asking for anything. She could see that clearly. He had made the decision to carry his own weight in this moment, to not reach toward her, to sit inside the consequences of what he'd done without trying to manage her response to them. It was possibly the most genuine thing she had ever seen from him, and she hated that it was this moment. How are you? She said, flat, clinical, because that was where she could go, that was solid. He understood the question. Managed, he said.
Dr. Osei has me on a treatment protocol. The tremors are controlled. The cognitive symptoms have been minimal so far. He paused. It is a progressive disease. I'm not under any illusions about that. What does your timeline look like? Best case, with current treatment maintaining efficacy, I have significant function for a long time. The research is better than it was 10 years ago. He met her eyes. Worst case, we'll know when we know. We. He had used the word without meaning to and caught it immediately, and she watched him catch it, watched him want to walk it back and decide not to. I'm not going to tell you what to do with what I've just told you, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I told you because you deserve the truth, and I should have given it to you a long time ago. You should have, she said. I know. She picked up her bag from the couch. She needed to leave. Not because she was done, but because she needed air and dark, and the inside of her own car where she could fall apart, or hold together, or do whatever it was she was going to do without an audience. I need to think, she said. I know. He stood when she stood. Sophia, don't. She said it quietly. Not a command, just a boundary. Let me go home and think. He nodded. She walked to the front door and he did not follow her further than the hallway, and she appreciated that, the restraint of it, the way he stood at the edge of the hallway and let her go without filling the space behind her with words. She had her hand on the door when she stopped. She didn't turn around. Did you love me? She said. While all of this was happening, the diagnosis, the decision, Victoria, did you... She stopped, swallowed. Did any of it overlap with something real? The silence lasted long enough that she started to think she'd made a mistake by asking. Every day, he said. His voice had gone rough in a way she hadn't heard before, scraped down to something without any production to it. I have loved you every day since I met you. That is the truest thing I know about myself, and also the one thing I have consistently failed to act on. A pause. I don't say that to make it better. It doesn't make it better. You asked for the truth, and that's part of it. She opened the door. The November night came in cold and immediate. She walked to her car without looking back, and she sat behind the wheel, and she pressed her hands against her face and stayed that way for a long time in the dark, in front of the Craftsman house, with its single-lit window and the Japanese maple standing bare in the backyard where she couldn't see it anymore. She did not cry. She was not sure what she was doing. It was not crying, and it was not composure, and it was somewhere in the ragged territory between them, and she stayed in it until it passed, and then she started the car and drove. She called Eleanor at 7 the next morning. Eleanor picked up on the second ring, which meant she had been awake and waiting, which meant she had known Michael was going to tell her and had been sitting with this since yesterday. He told you, Eleanor said. Last night. Are you all right? No, Sophia said. It was the most honest answer she'd given to that question in months. I'm not all right. She was standing at her kitchen window with cold coffee, watching the morning light come sideways through the buildings across the street. Eleanor, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. Always, Eleanor said. The dinner, the house, the transfer document you prepared 3 months ago. Sophia paused. Was any of it about Michael's diagnosis? Were you trying to position me somehow? Create a situation where I'd be pulled back into his life because he's sick and you were afraid of losing him? The silence on Eleanor's end was not evasive. It was the silence of someone taking a question seriously. No, Eleanor said. Not in the way you mean. Another pause. I will not lie to you. His diagnosis was part of why I moved when I did. Not to trap you. Not to engineer some reconciliation. But because I understood that the situation had a window, and I had things to say and choices to make that I had been putting off, and the diagnosis reminded me that putting things off was a luxury I was no longer willing to indulge. A pause. I transferred that property to you because it was the right thing to do. Full stop. What you do with the information Michael gave you is entirely yours. I have no position on it. Sophia looked at her cold coffee. He could have told me, she said. When he found out, he could have called me. Yes, Eleanor said. He could have. Instead, he let me spend 8 months believing I was left because I wasn't enough. Yes, Eleanor's voice was steady and did not try to soften it. He was a coward. I have told him so, repeatedly. And yet you love him. He's my son, Eleanor said. Love and approval are not the same thing, Sophia. I love him, and I am profoundly disappointed in him, and I believe he is capable of being better than he has been. All three of those things are true simultaneously. A pause. As for you, I love you too. And I want you to walk into whatever comes next with your eyes open and your hands free. That's all. Sophia set the coffee down. I'm moving forward with the conversion, she said. The house. I spoke to my lawyer. We're going to explore the nonprofit structure and the zoning requirements. Good, Eleanor said without surprise. I want to name it, Sophia said. She hadn't planned to say this yet. It came out because it was ready. The Harlow House. After the street the hospital sits on. Because I don't want it to be about me, and I don't want it to be about the Sterlings. I want it to be about where it is and what it does. A pause. That's exactly right, Eleanor said quietly. That's exactly what it should be. She told Renata on Friday over lunch in the hospital cafeteria, not all of it, not the diagnosis, because that was not hers to tell, but enough of the shape of it that Renata sat across from her with a container of soup going cold and her full attention sharpened to a point. He hid a medical situation from you, Renata said slowly, while simultaneously ending the marriage. Yes, and his stated reason was that he didn't want you to stay out of obligation. Yes. Renata looked at her for a moment. That's the most self-defeating logic I've ever heard from an intelligent person. He was scared, Sophia said. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. Are you going to... Renata stopped, recalibrated. What are you going to do? Sophia thought about the boy from Phoenix with his small, complicated heart. She thought about what it meant to hold something broken and decide whether you were capable of repairing it. She had been thinking about that same question, applied to different material, for 11 days. I'm going to build the Harlow House, she said, and I'm going to let everything else find its level. She paused. That's all I have right now. Renata nodded. That's enough. But it wasn't quite, and Sophia knew it. Because in the back of her mind, underneath the structural planning and the legal consultations, and the surgical schedule and the deliberate forward motion of a life being rebuilt, underneath all of it, Michael's voice at the door of the craftsman. Every day. I have loved you every day since I met you. She had not responded to that. She had walked out into the cold and driven home and done everything except decide what to do with it. On Saturday morning, 11 days after the dinner at Sterling House, she sat at her kitchen table with the architectural survey of the property that Dana's office had couriered over, and her phone buzzed with a text from a number she had now saved under his name. I start a new phase of treatment Monday. Dr. Osei is adjusting the protocol. I thought you should know, since you know. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, How are you feeling about it? His reply came quickly, which meant he had been holding his phone. Scared. Trying not to be. She looked at that for a moment, at the plainness of it, the absence of performance. She typed, That's allowed. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, I'll call you tonight. She set the phone down on the architectural survey of the house that was going to become the Harlow House, and she looked out the window at the November morning, and somewhere between the fear and the fury and the grief and the complicated, stubborn thing that refused to resolve itself into either forgiveness or its opposite, she understood that she had crossed a line she could not uncross, not back toward what they had been, but forward into something that didn't have a name yet, something that was going to cost her more than she had currently budgeted, and that she was going to do it anyway because the alternative was a smallness she could not make herself accept. She picked up the architectural survey and began to read. She called him at 8 that Saturday night, as promised. He picked up on the first ring. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the diagnosis, not about the divorce, not about the dinner or the deed or Victoria or Eleanor or any of the structural debris of the past year. They talked the way they had talked in the beginning, before the marriage had accumulated the weight of itself. About small things, specific things,
the kind of conversation that has texture rather than agenda. He told her about a book he'd been reading, a history of industrial architecture in the American Midwest, the kind of subject that had nothing to do with his life, but that he'd picked up in an airport and couldn't put down. She told him about the boy from Phoenix, not the clinical details, but the peripheral ones. The way the father had gripped the edge of the conference table during her explanation, the way the mother had asked only one question at the end, which was, "Will you be the one in the room?" And the way Sophia had said yes without hesitating. "That's everything," Michael said. "That one question." "I know," she said. She needed to know the person who understood her son's heart was going to be present for it. "Yes." A pause. "You've been doing that your whole career," he said, "being present for it." She didn't answer that. She wasn't sure she needed to. When they hung up, it was after 10, and she sat in the quiet of her apartment and understood that something had changed in the architecture of the situation. Not resolved, not healed, but reorganized, the way a fracture reorganizes the structure of bone as it begins the slow work of repair. December came in cold and absolute. The legal work on the Harlow house moved faster than Dana had projected, which Sophia attributed partly to Dana's professional ferocity and partly to Eleanor, who had quietly made 2 phone calls to people on the city zoning board who had known her for 30 years and who received her calls with the particular attentiveness of people who understood that Eleanor Sterling's calls were not social. No pressure was applied, none was needed. The shape of the project became clear in weekly meetings with Dana and an architect named Carlo Ruiz, whom Dana recommended. A compact, serious man in his 50s who walked through Sterling House on a Tuesday morning with Sophia and spoke very little while he looked at everything. "The bones are extraordinary," Carlo said, standing in the main hallway with his hands in his coat pockets. "Nothing load-bearing that can't be adapted. The East Wing has enough separation to create 8 to 10 independent residential units without compromising the common spaces." He looked up at the ceiling. "How many families are you projecting?" "Start with 8, Sophia said. "Scale from there based on what the pediatric ward actually needs." "Timeline? What's realistic?" 18 months from permit approval, if we don't hit material delays." He looked at the staircase, at the chandeliers, at the crown molding that was original to the house. "Are you preserving any of this?" Sophia thought about it. "Some of it. The bones, as you said. The fireplaces. The library can become a common room." She paused. "I want it to feel like a home, not a renovation, not a hospital and not a hotel, like a place someone actually lives." Carlo nodded, making notes on a small pad. "That's a more difficult brief than it sounds." "I know," she said. "That's why I hired you." Michael started coming to the planning meetings in January. This was not something Sophia had planned or suggested. It had happened gradually, in the way that things happen gradually when no one has explicitly forbidden them. He had asked in late December whether he could see the architectural plans, not as a stakeholder, he was careful to clarify, but because he had spent his life inside that house, and he thought he might know things about its structure that weren't in any survey. She had said yes. He had come to one meeting, then another. He had, it turned out, detailed knowledge of the East Wing's plumbing infrastructure from a renovation his father had undertaken in the 90s, knowledge that saved Carlo 3 weeks of diagnostic work. He showed up to the 3rd meeting with photographs he'd found in Eleanor's storage, documentation of the original construction room by room, which Carlo nearly wept over. He did not try to direct anything. He did not insert himself into decisions. He showed up, offered what he had that was useful, and when Sophia said, "Thank you, we've got it from here," at the end of meetings, he said, "Okay," and left. She watched him do this for 6 weeks and said nothing about it. Eleanor watched from a greater distance and said even less, which Sophia recognized as restraint that cost her something. In February, Michael started treatment adjustment. Dr. Osei had identified that the initial protocol was controlling the tremors adequately, but producing a side effect, fatigue, significant and unpredictable, that was interfering with his ability to function at the level his company required. The adjustment meant a period of recalibration, 4 to 6 weeks where the symptoms might fluctuate while the new medication reached therapeutic levels. He told Sophia on the phone, The way he had started telling her things on the phone, straightforwardly, without editorializing, offering the information and waiting to see what she did with it. "Do you need anything?" she said. "No," he said. "I'm managing." "Michael?" A pause. "I might need someone to know," he said. "That's not the same as needing help, just someone to know how a particular day went." "I can do that," she said. She could. She did. It became a small daily structure. Not every day, not rigidly, but enough that she knew the shape of his weeks and he knew the shape of hers. And this quiet accounting of each other's days was more intimate in its way than many things that had happened during the marriage. The confrontation, when it came, arrived from a direction she hadn't been watching. It was March, a Thursday, and Sophia was at Sterling House for a walkthrough with Carlo and 2 contractors when her phone rang and the caller ID said James Harwick. She knew the name. Harwick Capital, the firm whose acquisition by Sterling Enterprises had been Michael's largest deal, the one that had occupied the 18 months before the divorce, the deal that had pulled him so completely into the company's gravity that she had started to feel, in their apartment, like a detail he was vaguely aware of in the peripheral vision of his real life. She stepped away from the contractors and answered. "Dr. Hayes." James Harwick's voice was smooth in the manner of a man who had spent decades in rooms that rewarded smoothness. "I hope I'm not disturbing your day." "You are," she said. "What can I do for you?" A pause. He hadn't expected directness. They never did, men like Harwick, when it came from her. "I understand you're undertaking a significant conversion project at the Sterling property." "I am." "I also understand that Michael Sterling has been involved in the planning process." She said nothing. "I'll be direct," Harwick said, though his version of direct was still upholstered in several layers of management. "There are members of the Sterling Enterprises board who have concerns about Michael's current capacity to lead the company. His health situation has been, let's say, imperfectly contained. There have been observations. The treatment adjustment in February affected his performance in ways that several board members found concerning." A pause. "I'm calling you because I'm told you have a relationship with his mother and with Michael himself, and I believe you understand the situation more clearly than most." Sophia's jaw tightened. "What are you asking me?" she said. "I'm asking whether, in your professional medical opinion, Michael Sterling is capable of continuing as CEO." The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense with everything she was not going to say to James Harwick. "I'm not his physician," she said. "I'm not going to discuss his medical situation with you. And if the board has concerns about executive capacity, they have a process for addressing those concerns that doesn't involve calling his ex-wife." She paused. "Don't call me again about this." She hung up. She stood in the hallway of Sterling House, which smelled of plaster dust now and fresh lumber from the East Wing renovation, and she looked at the bare wall where Eleanor's photograph had been before it was carefully removed and stored, and she felt the cold spread through her chest that came when a threat she hadn't anticipated materialized into something concrete. She called Michael. "Harwick just called me," she said when he answered. No preamble. The silence was brief and then, "What?" "He's aware of the diagnosis. He said there are board members with concerns about your capacity. He asked for my professional opinion." She paused. I hung up. She heard Michael's breathing change. "How does he—" A pause. "3 people knew. Osei, my mother, you." "Then someone talked," she said, "or someone observed something they shouldn't have been close enough to observe." She paused. "Michael, how vulnerable are you right now, honestly?" A silence that ran several seconds too long. "The February adjustment—" He stopped. "I missed a board meeting. I sent Hayes Mortimer in my place and told them I had a conflict. 2 weeks later, I was late to the Delacroix presentation. I wasn't cognitively impaired. I was fatigued, but I understand how it looked." Another pause. "I should have been more careful." "You should have been more careful," she agreed. "But that's not the point right now. The point is that Harwick has information he shouldn't have and he's building a case." She paused. "Do you have an attorney on standby for board situations?" "Yes, Celia Marsh." "Call her today, not tomorrow." "Sophia." "Call her today," she said. I am not in a position to help you with the board, but I'm telling you that whatever is coming, it's already in motion. Harwick doesn't make speculative calls. She heard him stand, the specific sound of a person moving from seated to standing with urgency, a shift in the ambient sound of wherever he was. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll call Celia. Good. A pause. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. Manage it. The board meeting was called for the following Tuesday. Sophia knew about it because Eleanor called her Sunday night to tell her, Eleanor, who had a seat on the board that she had held since Michael's father died and that she had never relinquished, a seat that Harwick had spent 3 years trying various oblique methods of dislodging, and that Eleanor had retained with the calm permanence of a geographical feature. They're going to call for a capacity review, Eleanor said. Harwick has 2 other board members. He needs a majority, and he's 3 votes short, but he believes he can move the remaining votes if the meeting goes the way he's planning. What's he planning? Sophia said. He's going to present the February performance data, the missed meeting, the Delacroix delay. He has attendance records. He has timeline documentation. He's going to argue that the pattern constitutes a governance risk. Eleanor paused. He doesn't have the medical information directly, but he doesn't need it. The behavioral pattern is enough to raise the question, and once the question is raised publicly among the board, Michael has to answer it. And if he answers it honestly, then the board knows, Eleanor said, and some of them will be fine, and some of them won't, and we won't know which until it's happened. A pause. Michael is going to tell them. He's decided. Celia agrees it's the better position than being caught managing information. Sophia absorbed this. When did he decide? She said. This morning, Eleanor said. He called me after he spoke to Celia. He said, a pause. He said he was finished managing things by concealment, that he had spent a year making choices based on what he was hiding, and that all of them had been wrong. Eleanor's voice was steady, but something moved underneath it. He sounded very clear. He's walking into a room where Harwick has been preparing for weeks, Sophia said. Yes. And he's going in with the truth. Yes. Sophia pressed her hand flat against her kitchen counter and felt the cold of the stone against her palm. Is Eleanor Sterling going to be in that room? Eleanor Sterling, Eleanor said, with something that might have been dry amusement underneath the gravity, has not missed a board meeting in 11 years. Tuesday came cold and overcast, the kind of March morning that couldn't decide if it was still winter. Sophia had surgery at 7. The boy from Phoenix, Marcus, whose arterial repair they had scheduled for 6 weeks out, and then moved when a second imaging review showed the defect progressing faster than projected. She had been in the OR by 6:45, and by 7 she was inside the most demanding 4 hours of her surgical year, working with a precision that required everything she had and left room for nothing else. This was, she understood, what she had always been. Not what she had become after the divorce or what she was rebuilding toward. What she had always been, at the cellular level. A person who moved toward the broken thing with her whole self. She closed at 11:17. Marcus's heart, repaired, beat steadily on the monitor as they moved him to recovery. She stood in the scrub room afterward with her hands under hot water and her forehead against the cool tile wall, and she allowed herself 30 seconds of complete stillness before she straightened and dried her hands and went to find his parents. The father was standing in the corridor outside recovery, and when he saw her face, not her words, just her face, he sat down heavily in the chair behind him and put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook. She sat beside him and did not speak, because speech was not what was needed, and they sat there together in the corridor while the hospital moved around them until he was ready to stand. She had her phone out by noon, 3 missed calls from Eleanor. 1 text from Michael's number. Going in now. Whatever happens. And then nothing. The message unfinished, sent mid-thought, which told her he had been moving fast toward something and had reached for her in the gap between one breath and the next. She called Eleanor, voicemail. She texted, surgery done, Marcus is stable, what's happening? She was at her office desk, still in her scrubs, when Eleanor called back at 12:44. It went longer than expected, Eleanor said. Her voice was different. Not distressed, but altered, the way a landscape is altered after weather has moved through it. What happened? Michael told them, Eleanor said. Everything. The diagnosis, the treatment, the February adjustment, the reason for the absences. He stood in front of 11 board members and told them the truth, without documentation, without Celia's prepared framework. Just told them. A pause. Harwick pushed back immediately. He argued that undisclosed medical conditions constituted a fiduciary breach. He had a legal memo prepared. Sophia's hand tightened on the phone. Celia countered on the disclosure timeline and the treatment efficacy data, which she had from Osei's office. I supported Michael's position on the board's own record of accommodating executive health situations. I cited 3 precedents in the company's history that Harwick didn't know I had documented. Eleanor paused. It was contentious. There were 40 minutes that were genuinely uncertain. And? The vote was 7-4 to retain Michael in his position, subject to a quarterly performance review and a formal health disclosure addendum to his employment contract. A pause. Harwick abstained rather than lose on the record. Sophia let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. He's still CEO, she said. He's still CEO, Eleanor confirmed. For now. The quarterly reviews will be real. Harwick isn't finished. But Michael has the board's conditional trust, which is more than he had this morning. Another pause. He asked about you. When it was over, first thing. Sophia looked out her office window at the March sky, which was beginning very slowly to lighten. I need to tell you something, Eleanor said, and her voice shifted into something quieter. During the meeting, when Harwick was presenting his case, there was a moment where I looked at my son, and I saw something I had been waiting to see for a very long time. What? Sophia said. He wasn't afraid, Eleanor said. He was exhausted and exposed and completely without the armor he has worn in every professional room since he was 25 years old, and he was not afraid. A pause. He said, to the board, that the diagnosis had taught him the difference between managing a situation and living inside one, that for most of his adult life he had managed rather than lived, and that the cost of that approach had been, his word, catastrophic. And then he said the names of the things he had lost. Sophia said nothing. Your name was one of them, Eleanor said quietly. In a room full of board members and attorneys, he said your name. The corridor outside Sophia's office was busy with the ordinary afternoon motion of the hospital, carts and footsteps and the distant sound of a PA announcement. And she sat inside all of it with Eleanor's voice in her ear and felt something move through her chest that was not quite any one thing, but was dense and complicated and real. Eleanor, she said. I know, Eleanor said. I'm not telling you what to do with it. I know you're not. A pause. He's at the Craftsman, Eleanor said. He went there after the meeting. He said he needed somewhere quiet. Sophia looked at her hands on the desk. The surgeon's hands. The hands that had spent the morning inside a child's chest, working with everything they had on something that mattered absolutely. She thought about the unfinished text. Whatever happens. She thought about what it meant that he had reached for her in the gap. She stood up from her desk. She was still in her scrubs, and she had 3 afternoon consults on her schedule and a case review at 4. And she stood up from her desk and went to the door of her office and stopped with her hand on the frame, caught between the 2 directions of herself, the doctor with the afternoon ahead of her, and the woman who understood, with a clarity she could no longer argue with, that whatever was happening between her and Michael Sterling had moved past the point where she could continue to observe it from a careful distance. She turned back and called the front desk and pushed the consults to the following morning. Then she picked up her bag and walked out of the hospital into the March afternoon and got into her car and sat behind the wheel for a moment with her hands in her lap, not starting the engine yet, just sitting inside the decision she had made before she'd consciously made it, feeling its weight, feeling its shape, feeling the way it was going to cost her, and the way she was going to pay that cost anyway, because some things were only available once, and the window for them was not infinite, and she had spent enough of her life being careful in ways that had not, in the end, protected her from anything. She started the car. The Craftsman was 20 minutes away in afternoon traffic, and she drove it without the radio, with the particular focused quiet of someone moving towards something they have decided not to turn away from, and the March light came through the windshield pale and cold and entirely indifferent. And somewhere in that indifference was a kind of clarity that she found him in the backyard. Not inside the Craftsman, not at the window where she had last seen him standing, but outside in the narrow yard behind the house, crouched in front of the Japanese maple, with a pair of pruning shears and a focused attention that made him look, from the gate, like a man doing the only thing in the world that made sense to him at that moment. He hadn't heard her car, he hadn't heard the gate. He was entirely inside whatever he was doing, and she stood at the edge of the yard for a moment and watched him. The maple was not in trouble. She could see that even from the gate. It was a healthy tree, well established, its bare branches holding the clear architecture of something that had been well tended over years. But there was a section near the lower trunk where two smaller branches had grown across each other and begun to create friction, the kind of slow damage that isn't visible until it is. And he was working on those two branches with the careful deliberateness of someone who had found a problem small enough to solve and was solving it with everything he had. His right hand, she noticed, was steadier than it had been in November. She closed the gate behind her and he turned. He looked at her the way a person looks when they have been preparing themselves for aloneness, and something they weren't prepared for walks into the yard instead. Not surprised exactly. Something more specific than surprised. The particular expression of someone who had been holding a very large thing entirely by themselves, and has just been offered help they didn't think was coming. He stood up slowly. He was still in the clothes he'd worn to the board meeting, dark jacket, no tie now, collar open, and they had the creased, slightly wrecked quality of clothes that had been worn through something difficult. "I heard," she said. He nodded. Eleanor called. She came further into the yard and stopped a few feet from him, close enough to speak without raising her voice, far enough to give them both the space the moment required. The March air was cold and clear and smelled of the soil he'd turned up near the base of the tree. 7-4. 7-4, he said. Harwick will come back. Probably, she said. You'll handle it. He looked at her steadily. There was something different in how he was standing. It took her a moment to identify it, and then she did. He was not holding himself in the controlled way she associated with him, the executive posture, the particular architecture of a man who had trained himself to take up space with intention. He was just standing, like a person, tired and real and present in the cold backyard of a house that had always been more him than anything else he owned. You pushed your consults, he said. How do you know that? Because you're here at 2 PM in your scrubs, he said, and you don't break your schedule for anything that isn't worth breaking it for. She looked at him. I operated on Marcus this morning, she said. His expression shifted. How is he? Stable. Heart's beating clean. She paused. His father sat down in the hallway when I came out, just sat down, like his legs made the decision for him. Yeah, Michael said quietly. Yeah, that tracks. She moved to the low wooden bench against the back fence, an old thing, weathered gray, that she remembered from the first time she'd been in this yard years ago, and sat down. He came and sat beside her, not close, but not with distance either. The pruning shears rested on the ground near his feet. For a while neither of them said anything, which was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of two people who had said enough hard things to each other that silence felt like rest rather than avoidance. I said your name, he said. In the meeting. Eleanor told me. I didn't plan to. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, looking at the maple tree. Harwick was making his case, and I was sitting there with 11 faces looking at me, and I thought, I have been in this room, or rooms like this room, my entire professional life. I have managed every conversation I've ever had in this kind of room, and I was going to manage this one too, and then I looked at Harwick's prepared documentation, and he stopped. I thought about you in the hallway at Phoenix, and Marcus's father sitting down because his legs gave out. And I understood that I had spent so much of my life in rooms where the point was to not let your legs give out that I had forgotten that legs giving out was sometimes the truest possible response to the situation. Sophia looked at the maple, at the two problem branches he had just separated. What did you say? She said. Exactly. When you said my name. He was quiet for a moment. I said that the approach I had used to manage my diagnosis, concealment, control, removal of variables, had cost me the most important things in my life. And then I listed them. He paused. My marriage, Sophia Hayes, my mother's trust, my own self-respect. Another pause. Harwick's attorney actually objected to the personal nature of it, which I found almost funny. Almost, she said. Celia told me afterward it was either the smartest or most self-destructive thing she'd ever watched a client do in a board context. He glanced at her sideways. She said the 3 votes that came from the middle were the ones that moved after I spoke. Not after the legal argument, after. Sophia thought about that. About what it meant that the truth, stripped of management and strategy, had been more persuasive than preparation. It's going to keep being hard, she said. The quarterly reviews, Harwick's attention, the progression. She stopped. Chose the next words carefully. The disease is not a straight line. You know that. I know that. There are going to be worse periods. The treatment protocol OSE has you on is good, but it's not permanent, and the adjustments are going to keep happening, and some of them are going to be harder than February. She looked at him directly. Are you prepared for people to see that? I'm learning to be, he said. That's different from prepared. I know. He met her eyes. I don't have prepared yet. I have learning. It's what I have. She nodded slowly. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to hear it the right way. He waited. I am not here because you're sick, she said. I need that to be completely clear. I'm not here because I heard Eleanor's voice describe a frightened man and felt responsible for him. I am a doctor who works with catastrophically ill children and their families, and I understand the difference between compassion and what I am actually feeling, and what I am actually feeling is... She stopped. Let the sentence breathe. More complicated and less manageable than compassion. Something moved through his face. He didn't speak. I am furious at you, she said. I want you to know that's still true. I'm going to be furious at you for a long time about what you chose not to tell me. And there are going to be moments in whatever comes next when that fury is going to be in the room with us. And you're going to have to sit inside it without defending yourself. Because you don't get to defend yourself for this one. The decision you made cost me 8 months. I can't recover. And a story about myself that I had to rebuild from the ground up. And I am not going to minimize that or let you minimize it. I'm not going to minimize it, he said. Very quiet. Good. She looked at him. And I am also here, in this yard, having pushed my consults, which is its own statement. He exhaled. It was not relief exactly. It was more like the sound of a structure settling into a new configuration, finding the stress points redistributed, finding itself still standing. What do you want? He said. Tell me what you actually want. Not what you think is possible. What you want. She looked at the maple for a long time. I want to build the Harlow house, she said. That's the first thing, and it's not negotiable, and it's not connected to you. That is mine, and I am doing it regardless of everything else. She paused. I want Marcus to go home with a heart that works and stay home. Another pause. I want to stop treating my own life like a recovery project and start treating it like a life. She turned to look at him. And I want something with you that is not what we had before, because what we had before was not enough. And I think we both knew it, and neither of us said it. And I am not interested in recovering something that was already insufficient. If there's something to build, it has to be new. It has to be honest in ways we weren't. It has to have enough space in it for my work and your illness and our mutual tendency to manage things we should instead be present for. He was looking at her with an attention she recognized as complete. Not the performance of attention, the real kind. That's a very specific brief, he said. I'm a precise woman, she said. Eleanor's word. Apparently it applies to both of us. Something that was almost a smile crossed his face and then steadied into something more serious. I want to show you something, he said. He stood, and she followed him into the house, through the back door into the kitchen that was clean and sparse and had the quality of a space being actively used rather than staged. He went to the kitchen table, where a notebook was open beside a coffee cup, and he picked up the notebook and handed it to her. She looked at the open page. It was a list, handwritten, his particular handwriting which she had always recognized, angular and slightly too large for the lines. At the top it said, in capital letters, "What I owe." And below it, in no particular order, a series of entries. An apology that doesn't ask for anything in return. Time spent at the Harlow Project without agenda. Dr. Osei's full disclosure protocol followed without exception. Monthly check-ins with Mother that are actually about her and not about me. And near the bottom, slightly apart from the others, the truth to Sophia for as long as she's willing to receive it. She read it twice. She set the notebook down on the table. "You made a list," she said. "I've been making it since the board meeting was called," he said. 2 in the morning, couldn't sleep. I needed to... He stopped. I needed to know what it actually looked like. Accountability. What it was made of, specifically. Because I have been abstract about it my whole life. I have said the word without knowing the contents of it. Sophia looked at the list and then at him. "The Harlow Project," she said. That's on the list." "Yes." "Without agenda," she said. "Without agenda," he confirmed. She thought about Carlo Ruiz and his architectural drawings. She thought about the East Wing and the 8 residential units and the families who would sit in those rooms in the years ahead, waiting for their children to come back to them. She thought about what it meant to build a thing for people who needed somewhere to be while they were living inside the hardest thing that had ever happened to them. "I'll take the labor," she said. "Not the money. If you want to be part of it, you show up and work." He looked at her. "What does that mean, practically?" "Carlo needs someone to coordinate the East Wing subcontractors. It requires someone organized and relentless who has nothing to prove in the context of construction management. Dana tells me the East Wing permits come through in 6 weeks. She paused. "It's not a CEO job. It's a logistics job." "I know what logistics means," he said. "I know you do," she said. "I'm asking if you want it." He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "I want it." She nodded once. That was the agreement. No ceremony. No declaration. Just yes, and the nod that received it. Spring came to the Harlow House project the way spring came to everything that year. Gradually and then all at once. The way thaws work. The way recoveries work. The slow accumulation of small changes that one morning add up to something unambiguous. The East Wing framing went up in April. Sophia was there on the first day of it, standing in what had been Sterling House's east corridor, watching 2 contractors raise a partition wall that would eventually be the entrance to the 3rd residential unit, and she felt something move in her chest that was not sentiment exactly, but was adjacent to it, the particular feeling of watching something become what you intended it to be. Michael showed up at 7 in the morning with coffee and a thermos and a copy of the subcontractor schedule, and spent the day on a radio with 3 different teams without once looking like he needed to be acknowledged for it. He had learned, somewhere in the past months, how to be useful without being seen, and she found this more significant than almost anything else she had observed of his changes. It was the hardest thing for a man like him to learn, and he was learning it. Eleanor visited in May. She came on a Tuesday afternoon and walked through the East Wing with Sophia, while Carlo talked her through the residential units, each one designed with the specific needs of families and extended stays. Real kitchens, not galley kitchens. Storage for medical equipment, windows that opened, a small outdoor space attached to each unit because Sophia had been adamant that people living inside a hospital system's rhythm needed somewhere to be outside without going anywhere. Eleanor moved through each room without speaking for a long time. When they came back to the main hallway, the entrance that had become something between the old house and the new one, where they had kept the original staircase and the crown molding, but replaced the chandelier with something simpler and warmer, Eleanor stopped and looked up at the ceiling. "My husband bought this house because it was impressive," Eleanor said. He was not a man who understood the difference between impressive and meaningful. She looked around at the hallway, at the stripped walls being replastered, at the old oak floors being refinished, at the particular quality of a space in the middle of becoming something. "This is meaningful." "We're not finished," Sophia said. "Most meaningful things aren't," Eleanor said. She looked at Sophia. "How are you?" "Tired," Sophia said. "Grateful." Occasionally furious. At my son. At your son, Sophia confirmed. Good, Eleanor said. Hold on to that. It keeps you honest. I don't need help being honest. No, Eleanor said, with the precision that was entirely Eleanor. But you need permission to be angry at someone you're also choosing, and I'm giving you that permission in case you hadn't fully claimed it for yourself. Sophia looked at her. Has anyone ever told you that you are an extraordinary woman? Often, Eleanor said. I find it more useful to be a necessary one. But Victoria came in June. Sophia had not expected this. The text arrived on a Wednesday morning, brief and direct, in a way that reminded Sophia of their phone call months ago. I'm in the city for a week. I'd like to see what you're building, if you're open to it. No obligation. V. Sophia thought about it for half a day, and then wrote back. Saturday at 10. Victoria arrived in a cab, not the white Mercedes, wearing jeans and a jacket that had no performance to it, and she stood at the entrance to the Harlow house and looked at the facade of what had been Sterling House with an expression that Sophia couldn't fully read, something between recognition and relief. They walked through the east wing together. Sophia showed her the residential units, the common room that had been the library, the outdoor garden spaces being landscaped along the south wall. Victoria asked specific questions, practical ones, about capacity and operational funding and the intake process for families. Not the questions of someone performing interest, the questions of someone actually thinking about the structure of a thing. I want to contribute, Victoria said when they came back to the main hallway. I'm not asking for anything from this. I don't want acknowledgement. She paused. My firm handles brand development for organizations that need to build visibility for funding purposes. Nonprofits aren't typically our territory, but we've done it twice and done it well. I could put together a communications framework for the Harlow House, donor outreach, public narrative, media positioning. A pause. Pro bono. Completely. Sophia looked at her. Why? She said. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Because I spent 2 years in this city in love with the surface of things, she said. And I'd like to do something that has nothing to do with surfaces. Sophia studied her. The woman who had sat across the dinner table 9 months ago, composed, brilliant, rehearsed, was standing in front of her in a hallway that smelled of fresh plaster and raw wood. And she was not any of those things right now. She was just a person asking for a chance to do something that mattered. We need donor outreach built before the opening, Sophia said. We have operational funding for the first 2 years from the conversion of 2 of Eleanor's endowed accounts. But long-term sustainability requires a donor base that doesn't exist yet. That's exactly what I'd start with, Victoria said. You'd report to Dana Croft, Sophia said. My attorney manages the operational oversight. That's fine. You and Michael will be in the same building periodically, Sophia said. I need to know that's manageable. Victoria looked at her steadily. It's manageable, she said. We had a direct conversation in February. We're both, she paused. We're adults who made choices that didn't serve either of us. We've acknowledged that. It's manageable. Sophia nodded. Saturday mornings. Dana will send you the briefing materials. Victoria exhaled. One short breath, quickly controlled. Thank you. Don't thank me, Sophia said. Build something. The Harlow House opened on a Thursday in September. Not with a ceremony. Sophia had been explicit about this. No ribbon cutting, no formal event, nothing that centered the building over the people who would use it. Instead, the opening was the arrival of the first 3 families, one from rural Montana, whose daughter was 6 weeks into a cardiac treatment protocol at the hospital, one from Tennessee, whose infant son was awaiting a liver evaluation, and one from the city itself, but from a part of it so far from this address that the distance was effectively the same as a cross-country journey. Sophia was there when they arrived, not as a doctor that morning, but as, she wasn't sure what, the person who had made the building available, the person who wanted to know if it worked. The Montana family came first. The mother walked through the front door of the Harlow house and stopped in the entrance hall and looked around at the space that had once been Sterling House's imposing foyer and was now something entirely different, Warm, specific, a little worn in the ways that mattered, with real furniture and real light, and a kitchen visible at the end of the hallway that smelled of coffee, because Carmen, who had agreed to consult on the operational setup in a role that nobody had quite named but that everyone recognized as essential, had put a pot on. The mother looked around and her daughter, small and pale and wearing a hat because of the treatment, pulled at her sleeve and said, "Mama, it looks like a house." "It is a house," Sophia said. The girl looked at her. "Are we staying here?" "For as long as you need to," Sophia said. The girl considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old processing important information. Then she nodded, once, as though this had met some internal standard, and she walked further into the house toward the kitchen and the smell of coffee, like a person who had decided the place was acceptable and was ready to make it hers. Sophia stood in the entrance hall and watched her go and pressed her hand flat against the wall beside her and felt the plaster under her palm, solid and new over the old bones of the building. And she allowed herself, for a few seconds, to feel the full weight of the past 11 months. The dinner, the deed, the diagnosis, the board meeting, the boy from Phoenix who had gone home in July with his repaired heart and a follow-up appointment in 3 months. Allowed herself to feel all of it without managing any of it. And then she straightened and went to help Carmen in the kitchen. Michael was in the garden. He had been there since 7 in the morning, finishing the last of the south wall landscaping with the contractor who had done the work and who had, over the course of the summer, developed a particular rapport with Michael that Sophia found quietly meaningful. 2 men in work gloves in the early mornings, arguing about soil drainage, neither of them performing anything for anyone. She could see him through the kitchen window, talking to the contractor, gesturing at the far corner of the garden where they had planted a Japanese maple. His idea, offered simply and without explanation, and she had said yes without asking for one. He looked up and saw her through the window. He raised one hand. Not a wave exactly, just acknowledgement. The particular gesture of 2 people who have a history and a present and something they are still in the process of defining, who see each other across a room and don't need to make it more than it is. She raised her hand back. That night, after the families were settled and the staff were gone and the house was doing the quiet work of being occupied for the first time, Sophia and Michael sat on the bench in the south garden. The Japanese maple was small. It would take years to become what it was going to be. "Harwick filed a motion with the board in August," Michael said. "Not a surprise. She'd known it was coming." "I know," she said. "Eleanor told me." "He's going to keep coming." "Yes," she said. "What are you going to do?" "Keep showing up," he said. "Perform at the level the company requires. Follow the disclosure protocol. Let the quarterly reviews do what they're supposed to do." He paused. "There's going to be a point where the disease is further along and the performance conversation becomes real rather than political. I know that. When that happens, I'll make the right decision for the company," he said. "Even if it's the hard one." He paused. "I've been practicing making hard decisions honestly. I'm getting better at it." She believed him. That was the thing she had arrived at over the summer. Not faith exactly, not the blind faith of someone who had forgotten what he was capable of, but belief. The belief you extend to someone whose changes you have watched with your own eyes, close enough to see the effort they cost. "I want to tell you something," she said. He turned. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because what you did was forgivable in any easy sense. Not because I've forgotten it or because I think the accounting is settled, but because carrying unforgiveness is a weight I have decided I don't want to carry anymore, and because forgiveness is not the same as trust, and I'm extending one while the other rebuilds at whatever pace it rebuilds." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to understand those are different things." "I understand," he said. "And I need you to understand that I will tell you when the anger comes back," she said, "because it will. And I need you to sit inside it without deflecting and without defending yourself, because that's what honest looks like in practice." "I'll sit inside it," he said. She nodded. They sat in the garden while the September night settled in cold and clear around them, and inside the house the lights were on in the residential units, warm yellow against the dark. And the Harlow house held its first 3 families in the space that had once held generations of Sterling ambition and that now held something else entirely. Not the absence of ambition, but ambition redirected, turned outward, made useful. The Japanese maple was small and bare in the September garden. In a few years, it would be extraordinary. Michael reached across the bench and rested his hand palm up between them, not reaching for her, not asking, just placing it there, available, the way you place something down and let the other person decide. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she placed her hand in his. Not a resolution, not the end of the hard work, or the anger, or the careful daily choice to be honest rather than managed. Not the recovery of what they had been, which had never been enough. Something else. Something that didn't have a name yet, that was still in the early stages of becoming what it was going to be. Like the maple. Like the house. Like two people sitting in the dark in a garden they had made together out of the rubble of something broken, holding on with the particular grip of people who have learned the cost of letting go and decided, with full knowledge of that cost, to hold anyway. The night was cold and quiet and entirely their own.